to address repeat violent offenders. Facts matter, and those facts show that Canada's current bail system needs repair. Since 2005 to 2006, there are more people in pretrial detention than convicted and sentenced to provincial custody. In 2021-2022, over 70% of the provincial jail population across Canada was in pretrial detention. This affects society's most vulnerable populations in marginalized communities. Statistics Canada data shows that more visible minorities, women, and Indigenous persons are held in pretrial custody than are represented amongst Canada's population. In 2021-22, the violent crime rate in Canada rose 5%, representing a 7% increase in the past 10 years. Further evidence that our justice system needs repair. Northern, rural, and remote regions face unique challenges that impact the delivery of the criminal justice system services and access to diversion programs. Geography, distance, court delays, and a lack of human and other resources are consistently identified as barriers that contribute to the ineffective delivery of the criminal justice system. While all violent crime cannot be attributed to those on bail, the statistics are nonetheless concerning. It's not surprising that calls for reform have come from across Canada, including the public, police leaders, and importantly, Canada's premiers. In January, the premiers united and called on the federal government to expeditiously action meaningful bail reform by implementing changes to address public safety concerns associated with repeat offenders on bail. The NPF applauds their call to action and the justice system reforms they've made within their respective provinces. We also see the federal government's tabling of Bill C-48 in June as a good first step. But this cannot be the only solution. Provincial and territorial governments must now look at their own justice systems and make needed improvements. Our justice system is complex, with many interrelated challenges and flaws that cannot be addressed through legislation alone. Our report is intended as the foundation for ongoing discussion and action. It includes 7 recommendations, which I'll briefly outline before taking questions. Implementing data-driven and informed judicial decision-making on interim release and enhancing post-bail release monitoring. Our criminal justice system basically needs better data and information to identify, address, and mitigate future risks through informed decision-making and properly resourced bail monitoring programs. Currently, there is a complete lack of data throughout Canada, and without this information, it is difficult, next to impossible, to identify where reforms are needed. Another key discussion point is public safety interoperability and the integration through new technologies. While Canada has robust probation and parole monitoring systems in place, there are limited dedicated human resources and a lack of available technology to actively monitor the compliance of those on bail. We believe that public safety can be improved by leveraging data, technology, and analytical tools to ensure bail release provisions are data-informed and aligned across Canada. The use of electronic monitoring is one example of a proven technology that is not widely used. Another topic is integrated teams of prosecutors and police officers, like the integrated proceeds of crime teams and guns and gang teams. These teams would be helpful in monitoring individuals out on bail and would need to be co-located with prosecutors involved in the investigation at early stages rather than the more traditional siloed structure of prosecutors and police in Canada. Alberta and Manitoba have already implemented team-based approaches which have enhanced coordination within their respective jurisdictions. We've recommended that all governments invest in creating a community bail enforcement monitoring system These systems should provide real-time information about potential or actual bail breaches, which can be quickly acted upon by authorities. Last week, we heard the Premier's call for stronger bail reform to improve community safety. As part of their concern and commitment related to keeping their province and communities safe, they also called on the federal government to clarify their intentions for the future of the RCMP as it relates to Public Safety Canada's assessment of contract policing. We strongly echo this call for clarity and certainty. The ongoing speculation and vague language from government representatives, the media, and pundits is demoralizing to our members whose careers, lives, and even families have been built around service to their communities, large and small. Our members are not pawns. They are people and proud Canadians who care deeply about their jobs, their families, and their communities. They deserve respect and certainty in their future. This negative and protracted speculation also creates uncertainty for those considering a career in the RCMP. Just as we're making positive strides in post-pandemic recruitment recovery. And so today we have two asks that all governments, including provincial and territorial, commit to smarter bail reforms that go beyond legislation, and that the federal government immediately clarify the ongoing contract policing assessment and its intentions. The NPF is committed to working with all levels of government to see these bail reforms implemented and to improve community safety and certainty for our members and all Canadians. Thank you. If there's any questions.
You're asking today about more integrated data regarding criminal offenses. Who should lead that? Do you think the federal government should lead that, or should the provinces sort of get together and have a say on that? And this is very complex. We're talking about multiple jurisdictions. How do we go about doing that?
It's a good question. You know, I think the challenge we have today is that Canada's justice system is governed by federal legislation, but it's administered by provinces and territories. So everybody has a say and everybody needs to be involved and engaged. So whether the feds and the provinces get together in some kind of a subcommittee working group to figure out how they can integrate 2023 technology so that all jurisdictions can talk to each other, I don't care. But the solutions are out there, and ultimately they need to work together.
You said you want clarification on the assessment regarding a revamp of the RCMP. Don't you think the RCMP does need to change, though, given that we're talking today about new technologies and moving forward in the future? So where do you see the future of the RCMP?
Well, that's an interesting question. So, you know, the RCMP today is not the RCMP it was 10 years ago, nor 20 years ago, nor 30 years ago, nor 40 years ago. It is a constantly evolving machine, and our members are constantly evolving with the needs of Canadians. Now, are we talking about how the RCMP recruits, how the RCMP trains, how we deploy? There have been changes. So just recently, for example, it used to be, even just a year ago, that if you applied to the RCMP, you didn't know where you were going. And you were probably guaranteed not to come home to your home province. That's changing. That's policing in a modern world, looking for a diverse and more broader pool of applicants. So if you apply from BC, you can return to BC. That never used to be the case. You know, as far as leveraging technology, they are hampered by public works and procurement, you know, as evidenced by the body-worn camera rollout, that the RCMP is going to be the leader in that industry, where the majority of its frontline policing uniform members are going to have body-worn cameras. It's taken 3 years, and we're still not at the full rollout. So there's challenges there. Can they modernize by getting away from that particular umbrella and those particular handcuffs, which slow progress and change, and the ability to embrace modern ideas and philosophies? Probably. I would hope so.
Do you have an issue with resources when it comes to implementing some of these ideas that you want for bail reform? Talking about integrated teams of police officers, given the recruitment issues that many police forces are facing, how realistic are these ideas?
Well, I think it's similar to, if you go back to 2020 and 21, when there was a big discussion about defund or detask the police. So we are the last first responder standing in Canada. We have become everything to everybody for everything. And unfortunately, different levels of government have chosen, they're starting to look at it, but have chosen not to implement other initiatives to take the load off the police officers. So back to mental health calls or people in crises calls. There's a lot of technology out there and the ability to implement that technology to reduce the call volume on police officers on the front line. So similar to smart bail reforms, if we implement and we start using better technology and better data processes, ideally we would end up with fewer calls for service to the frontline police service.
And I noticed, at least in the recommendations you're outlining to us today, you're not touching on reforming the law in any way or you know, changing anything in the criminal code. Is that something you have looked at, or?
Well, that process has already begun. You know, the feds have started with Bill C-48. We'll have some input on that when it comes to committee, if it ever gets to committee, and when they come back in the fall session. So once we get there, we'll have an opportunity to discuss that. But that's a start. And as I mentioned earlier, the bail system in Canada is governed by federal legislation, but it's administered at a provincial level. So the premiers in each province have a responsibility to administer the justice system appropriately and resource it appropriately within their own provinces.
Brian, if I could just ask, if you, we really appreciate your questions. If you could state your name and your media outlet before your question, just for our record, we'd appreciate it very much. Thank you.
I don't know you all, but I do know Tonda. Hi, Tonda.
Well, I just actually on the idea of turning the RCMP into a mainly federal policing agency with all the other stuff. The MCC recommended essentially that, didn't they? Like the exactly what's happening, the exploration of this through talks, and with the eventual eye on it turning into this. So, can you talk about why you don't think that's the route the RCMP should go?
Well, I mean,
especially given the MCC report.
well, I'm glad you brought up the MCC. And whenever someone brings up the MCC, I have to remind them that we were a full-fledged participant in the Mass Casualty Commission. We were there for most of the proceedings. And I also remind them that in the executive summary and the chairperson's opening remarks, it clearly says that no police agency could have ever prepared or planned for this particular event. That being said, it could have happened in Denver, it could have happened in Ontario, it just so happened in an RCMP jurisdiction, and it became an examination of the response of the Bible Hill Detachment and the Nova Scotia RCMP to that event. So, recommendations out of the MCC. No, I don't read it as the RCMP should get out of contract policing. I do read it as the governments of Canada should look at their public safety continuum and see where they can deploy resources and fund resources most appropriately so that everyone is taken care of the way they expect to be taken care of. And again, back to one of the recommendations out of the MCC, for example, is Bible Hill Detachment was an established strength of 6 police officers. For almost a decade, the province of Nova Scotia allowed them to run with 4, and they kept 2 positions frozen. So one of the recommendations out of that was you can't do that anymore. If you have 6 positions authorized, you will fill 6. Improving the response times. Back to the call to the federal government about clarity and certainty on the future of contract policing, and to the RCMP about being able to fill the vacancies in those contract roles. And we already are the FBI of the North. We're actually the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, Homeland Security, as well as the U.S. Marshals and the Secret Service.
Any more questions? Is there any question online? People online, please use the raise hand function right now. Les gens sur en Zoom, utilisez la fonction main levée maintenant si vous avez une question. There's no question online. If there's no more question in the room, that concludes the press conference.
That's
Thank you.
fantastic. Thank you.